Hi, I am Tim. I am the Tinkering Turtle, and this will be part 2 of my previous video. I'm going to go over the basic setup of the bike. I'm going to work on the setting up the derailleur, adjusting the brakes, adjusting the handlebar and all its components, the seat height, and basically get this bike ready to go for its first ride. Let's get right into the meat of it. Now that the basic assembly for the bike is complete, we've got the fender, the wheel, the light, everything's on. What we're going to want to do is set the handlebars to the seat and then all the components on the handlebars to fit where you're sitting. To do this, the first thing we're going to want to do is bring the right hand pedal down to the bottom of its stroke. Okay, because we need to set the seat height. Now the way to set the seat height is you'll pull open the clamp, you'll adjust the height of the seat, line up the nose with the bike, and if this isn't tightened down enough, there's a nut on the back side that you open it, tighten that nut, and then reclose it and it'll have a harder clamp. You really want to have to crank on this cam lock to lock the seat in place. You don't want this going up or down or sliding side to side. Now, the trick I use is I put my heel, not the ball of my foot, the heel on the pedal. If the height of the seat is proper, your leg should be straight. Right now it's not. There's a bend in my leg, so I want to raise that seat up a little bit more. Keep in mind there is a minimum insertion here that you're going to want to be aware of. You don't want this too far up and out, and that's better. I got a straighter leg. Now when you move the ball of your foot back, you'll see that there's a slight bend in your leg, and that's what you want. Now one of the things I usually do as I turn these bikes into my daily riders is I will put a suspension seat post on it, but I always leave the original equipment on until I get the first 50 miles done and I can give you a review of the bike. Once your seat is adjusted, the next thing you need to do is take a look at your handlebars. And the way I do that is I sit on the bike, and right now you can tell these handlebars are too far back. So I'm going to loosen up the 4 bolts in the front. I'm going to pull it forward till it's in a comfortable position, and then I'll retighten those down. So I'm going to want to slide these up, and I just do this so my hands sit comfortably on the grips while I'm sitting on the seat, and that's pretty good. And then I'll tighten these back down. And when you retighten these, make sure you do the same thing as you did the first time. Make sure your gaps on the top and bottom are the same, and do your crosshatch quarter turn at a time until it's fully tightened. Get on the bike, double check. And that works nice. Now the other thing you can do is check how level the seat is. You want your seat to be level with, if it has a click in it, then you want the nose to be a touch higher than down. I don't know many people that have this down in any kind of an angle. Most of the time you start with something flat and then you adjust it afterwards to get to a point where it's comfortable. Now that the handlebar is set up to where you want it, you can adjust all the components on the handlebars to fit what you want to see. Now, one of the things I always suggest is the shifter looks like it's in a good position. I typically like the thumb throttle on the right hand side, but looking at this style of shifter, I'm probably going to have to leave it on, I like it on the right hand side. I'm probably going to have to leave it on the left because this shifter clicks from the bottom on both the front finger and the back finger to go up and down in gears. So there's not a lot of room to slide everything in and have an extra inch for the throttle on the right hand side, which is where I tend to use it, but with this style of shifter you really can't. So I'm going to leave it over there, but I do need to get the brake handles, which should be slightly down. You also have a bell, and you want these slightly down, and you want them to be the same angle on both sides. So what we're going to do is loosen up the handle. Probably this side looks pretty good, so I'm going to adjust the left hand side and get it to match the right hand. Now there's an Allen wrench or an Allen head underneath here that you'll loosen and then adjust it and tighten back up, and it's a 5mm. So now that I have it loose, I'm going to gauge it by grabbing both and getting the feel the same, and then I'm going to tighten it back up. Now that that's tight, I'm also going to check this side and make sure it's tight as well. Now both brake handles are set at the proper position. So underneath the thumb throttle, you'll find a 3mm hex bolt, and you're going to want to, what I like to do to start with my thumb throttles is hopefully you can see this, is I like when it's down at the bottom of its stroke to be almost vertical to the ground. That means that the thumb itself is coming down at about a 45-degree angle, and then tighten that back up. Now once it's tight, you'll see that it comes down at about a 45-degree angle, and when I push it down, it's almost vertical to the ground. This is my preferred position for the thumb throttle. You may like it different. Try it a few different ways and see what works best for you. Now I'm going to loosen up the keys for the display. I'm going to rotate that back more towards the rider, kind of at the same angle that you'll see the display at, and I'll tighten that back up. Again, there's no hard and fast rule where this has to be. I just tend to like to be able to see the buttons a little clearer as I do this. Now for the screen, I can see that it's not centered, so I'm just going to tug a little bit and pull it to the right place. And I also notice that it can move a little bit, so I will tighten up the bolts that hold that screen there, and they were very loose. So make sure you double check all the bolts, not just the ones that you work on. While we're centering the screen, I want to point out that there is a USB jack underneath that you can plug maybe a phone or something into to charge it, and it just has a rubber plug in it. It's right underneath the screen. Okay, now I'm going to double check everything, make sure everything's in easier finger reach. I'm going to adjust the screen so it's looking straight up at me. Everything feels good, and the handlebars are set. To determine whether or not you need to adjust the rear brakes, simply lift the back tire up off the ground on the kickstand and rotate it. And what you're doing is listening for any kind of rub on the rotor. There is none, and the brakes, I've already checked the brakes, they work fine. So the back brakes do not need adjustments. But as I said earlier in the video, you do want to clean them off with a little isopropyl alcohol to get any grease from the manufacturing process off of them. See all that dirt that's coming off of there? You definitely don't want that contaminating the brake pads. And once you've got it so you're not getting any significant amount of grease off, then you're all set. You should do that definitely at the beginning, and again, if it squeaks, pull the caliper off, pull the pads out, wipe them clean with isopropyl alcohol, and redo the rotors. You want all the grease as you can get off of them. That's pretty nice. Now the Troxus Lynx comes with Tektro mechanical brakes, not hydraulic. So the way to adjust these, and as we spoke about when I put the front wheel on, there is a slight rubbing sound. The way to adjust them is to loosen up the mounting bolts. Not a lot, just enough so that the caliper can move. You want so the caliper can move on the rotor. And then you'll reach through from the other side, and there's an adjustment that you'll tighten all the way down. Once it's tightened down, you'll back it off maybe 2 clicks, and then you'll either have someone hold the handle, or like me, you're going to put a clamp on it, and that tightens the calipers down onto the rotor. Once you've got the brake handle pulled up above, then you'll take and you'll retighten the mounting bolts for the brake caliper. And I usually just snug it down on both bolts before I tighten it. Now that it's snug, tighten it down. And then I will release the clamp, and I'm going to lift the bike and spin the wheel. And if I hear anything, which I do, I will come around to the back side and I'll open up that adjuster one more click. Until there's no more sound. Once there's no more sound or very little sound, as you spin the wheel, the brakes are adjusted. When you take it out for the first ride, you'll bed in the brakes. That process is really simple. You'll get it up to speed, 15 miles an hour or whatever. Then you'll pull both brake handles and you'll slow down until you almost stop. You don't come to a complete stop when bedding your brakes, because what you're doing is you're heating up the pads and you're wearing them into the rotor, and they're going to get hot, and you don't want to leave residue from the brake pad on the rotor. So you don't want the brake pad and rotor to come to a stop where it could melt contaminants or pieces of the rotor onto the, or pieces of the brake pad onto the rotor. So you'll bring it up to speed to 15 miles an hour, pull both brakes till you're almost stopped. Then you'll ease off the brakes so you don't leave that hot spot, and you'll bring it back up to speed. And you'll repeat that process 10 or 15 times to bed the pads into the rotor so they're perfect. And again, if you do develop a squeak, simply pull the calipers off, take the pads out, clean them off with isopropyl alcohol, re-clean the rotors, and put them back together. And you might have to do that once or twice even on a new bike to get rid of a squeak. That's okay, that's normal. You just need to go through the process. Once you get that contaminant cleaned up and it's contaminant free, you shouldn't have an issue again. Now there are several adjustments you can make on the derailleur. Typically, I find that when you get it out of the box, there's only one that matters. You've got the upper and lower limit, plus you've got the adjustment for how far down the derailleur goes in this direction. Typically, I only need to do the index adjustment, and that's the black knob that goes around the cable. Now what this does is it fine-tunes the adjustment for this lower part of the derailleur in or out so that the chain lines up perfectly with its current gear. As you can see, I've got the chain on the first gear, or the biggest gear. That makes it easiest to pedal. So what I'm going to do is lift it up on the kickstand, and I'm going to pedal it. And what I'm listening for is any kind of extra clinking or clanking. But if I were to adjust my indexer, and I'll adjust it this direction, which pulls this out. I also want to point out that up above here, I've got it set in first gear, and it's corresponding to first gear back here. And that's important. So now I've adjusted this out. Now you can hear a lot more noise. And it's almost like it wants to change gear. To fix that, I will adjust this back so that it's going in, and you can hear that noise is now gone. There is a little bit of noise on the front crank. That's normal because you're in first gear. That's the furthest that's going to be at an angle. The chain's going to be at an angle. Now, to double check the rest of it, you'll click down through each gear, listening for that sound, and see if you hear any problems. Right now, I think it's really well adjusted, and we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to reach up, go to second gear. That's nice, it's really quiet. Third gear. Fourth gear. You'll hear that the front crank isn't making as much noise now because the angle of the chain coming off to the rear is now more straight. Fifth gear. Perfect, quiet sound. Seventh gear or sixth gear. and 7th gear. And you'll note that it's starting to get a little bit more noise, but that's because the angle of the chain now is coming out. So that's all you really typically have to do out of the box, is adjust the indexer to make sure that the chain is perfectly centered on each gear. And once you check it on one gear, it should work on all the other gears, because how much it moves at each step is controlled up above in the gear shift, not down here at any of the adjustments. So once you get one gear, it should work good on each gear. And now the derailleur is set to go for our first ride. Okay, we've got the indexer adjusted, we've got the brakes adjusted, we've adjusted all the components on our handlebar. Everything seems to work perfectly. There's no damage to the bike. We're in good shape. The last thing to do is to put the battery back in the bike, and it's not quite fully charged, but for testing purposes, I want to put it back in there. So what you do is you'll take the keys, you'll slide it in the bike, you'll turn them all the way, you'll take your battery, and the testing part is going to be up, and then you'll have this little hook down at the bottom. You'll simply slide that up in the frame, push it down, and then slide it up into place, and it'll click into place. And then you'll turn your key, lock it in place. Now to turn on the bike, you'll click and hold the power button, and you can see the little power symbol on it for a couple seconds. The screen will light up, obviously. And what you look for is any kind of an error code. Right now there isn't any. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean the bike up on its kickstand, bringing the back tire up off the ground, and I'm going to push the throttle. Obviously, the motor works. If I put the bike in assist level 0, the thumb throttle no longer works. That's important to know. So if for some reason you say my throttle doesn't work, make sure you're in assist level 1 or above. And that uses the top up here or bottom button to adjust. See, this will go to 1, 2, all the way up to 5. So you got 5 assist levels there, all the way down to 0. At 0, your throttle does not work. To turn the bike off, you simply push the power button and it turns back off. The screen will go dead and then you're done. One of the last things we do before taking the bike out is we got to make sure that we have the proper amount of tire pressure in the tires. Now this bike has come with just a little over 14 pounds of pressure in the bike. These are fat tires, so you're talking about a 30 psi max tire pressure that goes in these. Conventional wisdom for fat tire bikes is for paved paths you want 20 psi, for dirt you want 15, and then for sand you want to drop it down to like 7 psi. I personally run a little bit higher than 20. I run at 25. I don't like pushing the max and potentially popping a bead when you hit something hard, but 25 seems to work really well for the paved bike paths in my area. Now we move on to the front one. Regardless whether you have a compressor like me or just a hand pump, it's a pretty simple process. Just make sure you have some sort of tire gauge to give you the proper amount of pressure so you know exactly where you're at. There you go. So at this point, the bike is completely set up, completely assembled. It was a really simple process. The build quality seems really nice. In the next video, I'm going to bed the brakes. I'm going to put 50 miles on the bike, which I do for all my reviews, so I can get a really good sense of what the bike is or isn't. This bike accommodates riders from 5'1" clear up to 6'3", which is where I'm at. It'll carry a load of 353 pounds, which is well above what I weigh. I weigh the better part of 300 pounds. So we're going to get a good assessment of what this bike can do. What I do love about these bikes is that you can just step right in and you're off, or when you come to a stop, they're easy to get on and off. You're not trying to lift your leg. You just simply have to clear this level. Now this level is about 17 inches. So as long as you can lift your foot 17 inches and put it through, this bike's gonna be really good for almost any rider. It's got really nice Kenda tires, knobbies. I'm pretty happy with the actual bike itself. I can also double check and make sure the headlight's working. And it's got a headlight button. The headlight's nice and bright. It looks like an interesting little bike. We're gonna get more into that again the next video, bedding the brakes, putting 50 miles on it, going over the features of the bike and giving you my initial review. I will probably do a third video as well. Maybe if I can find some information on the settings that you can adjust in the screen, and an extended review with a lot more miles on it. I appreciate you staying till the end. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below, and I will catch you next time.